Ok acontis quando simples auto de bondade vira tudo de cabeça para baixo. Uma pequena lancanite de Nova York, a deciso de garcum de deixar uma menina semteto canta por comida desencadia uma série de eventos que ninguém poderia prever. Neo é apenas sobre sacrificio ou fazer o que é certo, é sobre como uma única escala pode desafiar tudo o que você pensava saber sobre a verdade, família e segundas chances. E aspire a conhecer as pessoas que interviram para tornar o impossível possible. Jake had worked countless long shifts at the diner, but that evening was different. Through the rain-speckled glass, he spotted Emily, a frail, homeless girl shivering in the cold. Her oversized hoodie was barely enough to protect her from the November chill. Something in her bright, hopeful eyes struck a chord deep in his soul, a silent plea he couldn't ignore. He hesitated, then gestured for her to come in, knowing full well he was bending the diner's unspoken rules. With a shaky voice, Jake offered Emily a deal. "Sing for the customers, and I'll make sure you don't leave hungry," he said. She hesitated, clutching her torn jeans nervously, but eventually nodded. The first note she sang was soft, almost like a whisper, yet it turned heads. Her voice, though raw and untrained, carried a depth that silenced the clatter of plates and forks. Even Jake, who'd heard it all, felt a strange sense of wonder. The diners paused, their conversations fading into stunned silence as Emily's voice filled the room. It wasn't polished or perfect, but it was honest, a melody tinged with the kind of sorrow only lived experience can create. Some of the regulars exchanged glances, unsure whether to be amazed or unsettled. Jake, however, felt his instincts confirmed. This was a moment no one would forget. As Emily finished, applause broke out, hesitant at first but quickly growing. Jake caught her gaze and smiled, sliding a plate of hot pancakes toward her. She devoured them like someone who hadn't eaten in days, her small hands trembling slightly. In that instant, Jake realized he wasn't just feeding her body. He was nurturing her spirit, showing her a sliver of humanity she likely hadn't known in a long time. Jake couldn't help but wonder about Emily's story. What sacrifices had she made to survive? What truths had been buried in her young life that brought her to his diner door? As she ate, he caught glimpses of vulnerability and resilience intertwined, qualities that reminded him of his own battles, though his circumstances had been far kinder. Even as the warmth of the moment settled, Jake knew trouble would soon follow. Kindness like this didn't always sit well with those who valued appearances over humanity. The thought of what Mr. Harris might say loomed over him, but for now, Jake chose to focus on the fragile smile that had returned to Emily's face. Sometimes, doing what felt right came with a price, and he was about to find out just how steep it could be. The door to the diner swung open, and Mr. Harris's familiar heavy footsteps echoed across the tiled floor. Jake stiffened as the owner's sharp gaze locked onto Emily, who was still clutching her empty plate with trembling hands. "What's this, Jake?" Mr. Harris barked, his voice carrying the edge of authority. Jake knew this confrontation was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. He braced himself, choosing his words carefully as he explained what had happened. Mr. Harris didn't see a heartfelt act of kindness. He saw a threat to his diner's reputation. "This isn't a charity, Jake," he snapped, crossing his arms with a scowl. His words stung, but his tone held something more, an unyielding fear of losing control over his carefully curated image. The customers, who moments ago had applauded Emily's singing, now avoided eye contact, unwilling to challenge the owner's growing temper. Jake stood his ground, though the weight of the moment pressed heavily on his chest. "She's just a kid," he said firmly, his voice carrying a quiet defiance. "She sang, and she earned that meal." Mr. Harris wasn't moved. His face grew redder as he lectured Jake on rules, image, and the dangers of letting emotions dictate decisions. The tension in the room was thick, each word feeling like a stone cast into a still pond. Emily, sensing the rising conflict, shrank back toward the corner of the booth. Her blue eyes darted between Jake and Mr. Harris, uncertainty clouding her expression. Jake noticed and softened his tone, turning back to the owner. "Sometimes, doing the right thing isn't about what it looks like," he said. "It's about what it means." A few customers nodded subtly, but Mr. Harris remained unmoved, his focus solely on maintaining his authority. The air grew colder as Mr. Harris finally declared his ultimatum. "If you can't follow the rules, Jake, you're out." A heavy silence followed his words, cutting through the diner like a blade. Jake knew this was no idle threat. He glanced at Emily, her small frame hunched over in an attempt to disappear, and felt a surge of resolve. Some sacrifices, he thought, were worth making. Jake's decision would shape more than just that moment. The consequences of standing up for Emily would ripple far beyond the diner's walls, touching lives he hadn't yet met. But for now, the question loomed. Was he willing to pay the price for his principles? One thing was clear: this was only the beginning of a much larger fight. Jake felt a knot tighten in his stomach as Mr. Harris's words echoed in his mind. "You're out." The weight of the decision pressed against him, but his gaze shifted to Emily, who was now clinging to the edge of the table, her small frame trembling. In that moment, Jake made a choice that would change everything. He removed his apron with steady hands and laid it across the counter. "Then I guess I'm out," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the room like a razor. The customers sat in stunned silence, their faces a mix of admiration and discomfort. Jake's act of defiance wasn't just about Emily, it was about showing everyone that principles meant more than paychecks. He turned to Emily, who looked up at him with wide eyes, and offered her a soft smile. "Come on, kid," he said, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. It wasn't just the words he spoke, but the calm certainty in his actions that carried an unspoken message. Doing what's right often demands a price. As they stepped outside, the cool air greeted them, and Jake exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Sacrifice had never felt so tangible. "You didn't have to do that," Emily murmured, her voice barely audible. Jake crouched to meet her gaze, his hazel eyes reflecting a mix of exhaustion and determination. "Some things are worth fighting for," he said, "even if it costs more than we think we can afford. Standing up for what you believe in can feel like stepping off a cliff without a parachute." Jake's decision didn't come without fear. The weight of uncertainty was heavy. But what choice did he have? To accept injustice silently was to betray the truth he carried in his heart. Sometimes, the hardest moments of sacrifice create space for something greater to emerge. It's like a seed buried in the dirt, unseen, yet preparing to sprout. Emily watched him closely, her own small spark of hope rekindling. For the first time in what felt like forever, she saw someone who didn't just talk about doing the right thing but lived it. In Jake's quiet courage, she found a flicker of belief that perhaps, despite everything, there was still goodness in the world. Jake wasn't just standing up for her, he was standing up for an idea that could ripple far beyond this single act. Even as they walked away from the diner, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. The act of standing firm wasn't the conclusion, it was the first step. What awaited them next was unknown, but Jake was certain of one thing: they weren't walking into the future alone. The seeds of change had been planted, and now, it was only a matter of time. Jake and Emily found themselves in the dim glow of a street lamp, the cool night air wrapping around them like an unwelcome reminder of their uncertain future. Jake tried to mask his worry, but his thoughts raced. Where would they go now? Just as the weight of the evening threatened to overwhelm him, a familiar voice broke through the silence. It was Sarah, Jake's neighbor, her auburn curls bouncing as she hurried over. "Jake, what's going on?" she asked, her kind green eyes scanning the scene. Without hesitation, Jake explained, and Sarah's face softened with understanding. Sarah had always been the kind of person who seemed to know when someone needed help. "You can't stay out here," she said firmly, pulling her cardigan tighter against the chill. "I know someone who's hiring at a cafe, and there's a spare room at my place if Emily needs somewhere to rest." Jake hesitated, his pride momentarily warring with his gratitude, but Sarah's warm smile made it clear, this was an offer without strings. Sometimes, he realized, leaning on others wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. The next morning, Sarah introduced Jake to the cafe owner, a cheerful woman named Linda who ran her business with heart. The cafe wasn't glamorous, but it had a charm that spoke of community and second chances. Linda welcomed Jake without hesitation, appreciating his hardworking spirit. It wasn't long before he found himself back in an apron, this time in a place that felt less like a job and more like an opportunity. Meanwhile, Sarah helped Emily settle into her spare room, where a soft bed and warm blankets offered the child a comfort she hadn't known in years. In Sarah's simple acts of kindness, Jake found himself reflecting on the power of community. Sometimes, it takes just one person willing to step in to turn a storm into a manageable drizzle. He couldn't help but think of the many times he had overlooked moments to offer help in his own life, too caught up in his routine to notice others' struggles. Now, walking this road with Emily and Sarah, he saw how much those small sacrifices could mean. Emily, though still guarded, began to open up in small ways. She started to hum little tunes as she helped Sarah fold laundry or clean up after dinner. Jake noticed how music seemed to give her a sense of peace. Sarah, ever perceptive, encouraged her. "Maybe you can sing at the cafe," she suggested one evening. Emily's eyes lit up briefly before doubt crept in, but Jake gave her an encouraging nod. "One step at a time," he said. As the pieces of their lives began to fall into place, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's voice might be the key to something bigger. What had started as a small act of kindness at the diner was slowly unfolding into a path neither of them could have predicted. The future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: with a little help, they were heading in the right direction. The cafe buzzed with the gentle hum of conversation, the clink of coffee cups, and the aroma of fresh pastries. Emily sat nervously in a corner, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her oversized hoodie. Jake knelt beside her, his voice calm and reassuring. "You've got this," he said, offering her a wink. Linda, the cafe owner, adjusted the small microphone on the makeshift stage and gave Emily an encouraging smile. It wasn't just a performance, it was a chance for Emily to rediscover a part of herself. As Emily stepped up to the microphone, the room fell quiet. Her first note was soft, hesitant, but as she continued, her voice grew stronger, filling the cafe with a soulful melody. It wasn't just her singing, it was the raw honesty in her voice that captivated everyone. Jake watched from the back, his heart swelling with pride. Customers who'd come for a quick coffee found themselves lingering, their faces reflecting a shared awe. Word spread quickly. By the end of the week, the cafe was bustling with new faces, all eager to hear the young girl with the golden voice. Emily became the heart of the place, her songs weaving a sense of connection among strangers. Linda, ever the entrepreneur, added a live music night to the schedule, giving Emily a regular stage. Jake couldn't help but marvel at how something so simple, sharing her gift, was transforming not only Emily's life but the entire cafe. But it wasn't just about the crowds or the applause. For Emily, singing became a way to heal. Each song was a small act of reclaiming the confidence life had taken from her. Jake noticed her shoulders straightening, her voice carrying a new kind of certainty. Sarah, who often sat in the front row, would nod along with every note, her smile a silent affirmation. Emily's journey wasn't just about her voice, it was about finding a place where she belonged. Jake, too, found himself changing. Watching Emily's transformation reminded him of the sacrifices that had led them here, but also of the truths he'd learned along the way. It wasn't about grand gestures. Sometimes, all it took was believing in someone when they couldn't believe in themselves. Jake had offered Emily a chance, and now she was offering something back, a reminder that resilience and hope could grow even in the hardest of circumstances. As the nights grew busier and Emily's confidence soared, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that their story was far from over. The light in Emily's eyes spoke of a strength she was just beginning to understand. Yet, with every step forward, new challenges loomed on the horizon. Jake knew that with the right care, Emily's talent could shine even brighter, but protecting that light would demand just as much as nurturing it. As Emily's voice continued to draw crowds, it didn't take long for word to spread beyond the cozy cafe. Local reporters began to show up, snapping pictures and asking questions. Jake noticed the way Emily's smile would falter when the attention grew too intense, her small frame stiffening under the weight of their curiosity. It wasn't just the crowds, Managers, talent scouts, and even strangers began offering promises of fame and fortune, each more enticing than the last. Jake, however, saw the risks lurking behind their smiles. Jake took it upon himself to shield Emily from the pressures that came with her newfound attention. "You're still a kid," he told her one evening after another busy night. "It's okay to take a break." But Emily, eager to prove her worth, sometimes struggled to slow down. Jake decided to step in, creating a schedule that balanced her performances with time for rest and reflection. He even enlisted Sarah's help, ensuring Emily had a supportive environment where she could simply be a child again. One evening, a flashy producer approached them with a contract, promising the world. Jake could see the excitement flicker in Emily's eyes, but something about the offer felt too good to be true. "Take your time," Jake advised, keeping his tone steady. He remembered stories of young talents who had burned out too quickly, their dreams turning into nightmares. Jake's instincts told him that Emily's well-being had to come first, even if it meant turning down tempting opportunities. Emily, though young, began to understand the importance of setting boundaries. She started to speak up, expressing when she felt overwhelmed or unsure. Jake encouraged this, reminding her that her voice wasn't just a gift for others, it was also hers to control. He sought advice from Linda, who had seen her fair share of ambitious people lose their way. "Fame is like fire," she said one evening, her tone thoughtful. "It can warm you or burn you, depending on how you handle it." Through it all, Jake remained a steady presence, reminding Emily that the value of her gift wasn't measured by the size of her audience but by the truth she brought to her songs. He made sure she understood that her story, her sacrifices, and her resilience were what made her special, not the applause. It was a lesson he hoped would stay with her, even as her journey continued to unfold. Despite the challenges, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They were in this together. Jake knew that protecting Emily's light wasn't just about shielding her from harm, it was about helping her grow in a way that kept her grounded. And as he watched her take the stage yet again, he couldn't help but feel a quiet pride. Whatever came next, they were ready to face it, together. The cafe was alive with its usual energy when a figure appeared in the doorway, a woman thin and weary, her face etched with lines of hardship. Jake noticed her immediately, sensing something different about the way she stood there, clutching the edges of her coat. She scanned the room with an urgency that made Jake's heart skip. When her eyes locked onto Emily, who was setting up for her next performance, they filled with a mixture of hope and hesitation. Jake's instincts kicked in. This wasn't a coincidence. Emily turned as Jake gestured toward the woman. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The recognition in Emily's bright blue eyes was instant, her small frame stiffening as if bracing for impact. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. The word cut through the bustling cafe, silencing the chatter. Jake watched as the woman took a tentative step forward, her own voice breaking. "Emily, it's me." Tears spilled over as Emily ran into her mother's arms, her guarded demeanor dissolving in an instant. The embrace was raw and desperate, the kind that comes after years of longing and unanswered questions. Customers sat quietly, some discreetly wiping their eyes, as the scene unfolded. Jake felt a lump in his throat. This was the kind of moment he'd silently hoped for, though he hadn't dared to voice it. The truth of their connection was undeniable, and it carried the weight of years lost. As the initial shock wore off, Emily's mother, her voice soft but firm, began to explain. She spoke of the sacrifices she'd made and the mistakes she regretted, her words heavy with the pain of separation. Jake stood by, offering silent support as Emily listened, her small hands gripping her mother's tightly. It wasn't an easy conversation. There were tears, apologies, and lingering doubt, but the truth had finally found its way to the surface. Jake watched the reunion unfold with a quiet pride, knowing he had played a small part in leading Emily to this moment. He could see the mix of emotions in her mother's eyes, sorrow for the time lost, gratitude for Jake's kindness, and determination to rebuild what had been broken. Sarah joined them, her calming presence offering reassurance that they weren't alone in this fragile new beginning. As mother and daughter sat together, sharing stories and tentative smiles, Jake couldn't help but wonder what this reunion might mean for Emily's journey. It was a moment of closure, but also a door opening to new possibilities. The sacrifices they had all made, Emily's, her mother's, and even Jake's, were shaping a story that was far from over. What lay ahead would demand resilience and hope, but for the first time, they were facing it as a family. With the warmth of the reunion still fresh, Emily and her mother began piecing together the fragments of their lives. The cafe, which had once been a stage for Emily's voice, now became a gathering place where they could reconnect. Jake watched as they found small ways to bridge the gap between the past and the present. Emily's mother brushing her hair in the morning, Emily sharing stories of the people who had helped her along the way. Each gesture, though small, felt monumental in the journey toward healing. Jake and Sarah worked quietly in the background, ensuring the family had the support they needed. Sarah, with her ever-practical kindness, connected Emily's mother to local resources, counseling, job opportunities, and even affordable housing. "This is just a start," Sarah would say, her green eyes sparkling with optimism. Jake pitched in too, using his connections at the cafe to help Emily's mother find part-time work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, a step toward stability. Emily, meanwhile, began to thrive in ways Jake hadn't expected. Her singing grew richer, her confidence stronger, as she channeled the truth of her story into every note. Customers still flocked to the cafe, but now they came for more than the music. They came for the hope her voice inspired. Linda, the cafe owner, even suggested holding a special event to celebrate Emily's journey, an idea that brought a shy but genuine smile to the young girl's face. The community rallied around them, proving that the sacrifices Jake and Emily had made were worth it. Strangers became friends, offering small acts of kindness that rippled outward: a donated bicycle for Emily to get to school, an old coat for her mother to wear during the colder months. It was as if the entire neighborhood had caught on to the magic of their story, each person eager to play a part in its unfolding. Through it all, Jake found himself reflecting on the twists and turns that had brought them here. The diner, the sacrifices, the acts of defiance, they had all led to this point. It wasn't just about helping Emily or standing up for what was right. It was about creating a ripple effect, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark change. And now, as he watched Emily and her mother walk hand in hand toward a brighter future, Jake felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. Yet, Jake knew this was just the beginning. Life had a way of testing even the strongest bonds, and while they had overcome so much, the road ahead would demand resilience, trust, and continued sacrifices. But for now, there was hope, and sometimes, that was more than enough to build a new beginning. Now that you've heard this incredible journey of sacrifice, truth, and the power of standing up for what's right, ask yourself, what would you do if faced with a similar choice? Are there sacrifices you're willing to make to help someone else, even if it means stepping outside your comfort zone? Remember, sometimes the smallest actions can create ripples of change that transform not only one life but an entire community. So, how will you apply this story to your own life? Will you be the person who steps in when others look away? Let us know in the comments how this message resonated with you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss a chance to learn and grow with stories like this one. Together, we can inspire the kind of courage and kindness that makes the world a better place.